was recently asked if there was one moment in my life that had me pause and switch tracks. Many, I thought. Sadly, some I'd like to forget because the tracks led to darkness, and a few I will never forget because from the darkness came the light. I want to share with you one such moment. In France, July 14th is a French national holiday called Bastille Day. It celebrates a turning point in the French Revolution and the unity of the French people. In 2016, on that day, I was in Nice with 5 students and my daughter. My students were attending a 3-week innovation and entrepreneurship program with about 400 students from around the world. And while much of Nice was closed for the holidays, it was business as usual for me and my students. Little did I know when this photo was taken on Bastille Day that the day would end with these 2 young men, Ishmael and Misha, impacting my life in such meaningful but different ways. One through life and one through loss of life, yet both causing me to pause and reflect on my own humanity, reminding me to be the light. Life can change in a moment, and it did. Early evening, about 30,000 people made their way to the promenade to celebrate the holiday. Despite efforts to watch the fireworks with my students, plans changed, and I stayed at one of the ends of the promenade to watch and celebrate with my daughter and 2 colleagues. I remember it being a pretty spectacular night. One moment, the lights from the fireworks were adding sparkle and joy to the evening mood, and then everything went dark. What I remember is hearing chaos and looking and seeing thousands of people running towards me and screaming. I don't recall what I thought other than, "Where's my daughter?" She had wandered down the promenade to capture photos of the fireworks, but thankfully she felt an urge and she had returned. Before I knew it, we were being herded out the back end of the restaurant while gunshots were filling the air. I began to panic and was thinking, is this really happening? Safety was the only thing going through my mind, and at that moment, my thoughts went to my students and I realized I had left my phone on the table. I was paralyzed by the thought of no connection to them. Then what I considered an act of courage, my colleague's husband went back through the restaurant and returned with my phone. Where do you go when no place feels safe? Well, I knew that squatting and hiding behind a car was not the best option. We could hear the doors on the streets beginning to slam and lock. Our first instinct was to hide in a dumpster, but when we ran back, the doors into that entry were closed. We tried several apartment doors, all locked. Then finally, we met one just closing, and with open hearts, they let us in. My heart was pounding. I had a message from one of my students, Rebecca. Launa, Misha's been shot. Launa, Misha's been hit. Launa, Misha's gone. And then I kept getting updates. With shaking hands, I messaged a colleague to call me. After speaking, she triggered the emergency response at MacEwan, and MacEwan became my lifeline between home and Nice. I couldn't get to my students that night as the mayor had called lockdown on the whole city, and I wasn't able to leave until early morning. I can't describe how difficult it was for me not knowing if my students were safe. But once home, I got a text and a photo from Rebecca saying they had Ishmael. They had all pulled their mattresses into one dorm room and were sleeping together. I knew they had each other. I slept for 2 hours, then the morning brought clarity as to what had happened. So what really happened? Ishmael has described to me what he heard and experienced. I won't tell his story, that's for him to tell. But what I will say is what he heard was the eerie sound, which was the 19-ton truck quietly accelerating towards them. Its lights were out. No one knew what was coming. It was seconds before he and 7 other students realized the driver was intentionally running over people, and they jumped to get out of the way. During this unthinkable act of terrorism, the 19-ton truck traveled almost 2 kilometers, taking the lives of 86 people and injuring 458 others. For the next 6 days, I was MacEwan's representative on the ground, partly because I would not come home, not until we found Misha. He was one of the 5 students who was missing from the program. For those next 6 days, the job was not the job I went down with, but my life had prepared me for it. I was MacEwan's representative on the ground. And I just said that. Misha was one of 5 students who was missing from the program. My most important job I had for those 6 days was being mom to this group of students, this tribe. This was a day where the emotions ran the roller coaster tracks from the lowest of low up to the very high. These young men told us their stories of being on the promenade, their lived experience of losing 3 of their friends in the attack. Misha Basilevsky was one of the victims. We cried, yet in the end were able to find joy and develop a bond that forms only in the hearts. Tuesday, July 19th, was a surreal day. At 11 a.m., we met at the victim services to be with Misha's family at their request. We wanted to be there for them to help celebrate Misha's memory, to hold space, to share stories, to hold hands, and to hold hearts. In that evening, we all gathered on the promenade to pay respects for all the lives that were lost during the attack. There were lots of tears, lots of hugs, and many, many moments of silence. The experience of coming together strong and in solidarity is a powerful human experience. I came back from France wanting to cultivate a deeper personal and social awareness so I could be at my best to serve our common human future. I came home with more questions than answers. How are we so connected yet so dismally disconnected? Why is it only in times of crisis that we come together in solidarity and with understanding, regardless of our differences? How do we lay new tracks to humanize education? I was struck by a couple of things in Nice. First was the complexity of an emergency response where all people who must come together in a coordinated effort. Machine intelligence could coordinate and communicate much of what made the necessary actions more efficient, but it was the human connection, the empathy displayed by all the people that created this feeling of solidarity. I came home with insight that terrorism could not wither the human spirit, nor could technology ever replace us. We are all joined by something uniquely human, and I believe that it is our capacity to connect and empathize from the heart. It also struck me that we worry so much about students' success, that we forget that the most meaningful learnings come from failure, from challenge, from an experience whose positive outcomes are not known. We still educate students in silos, but that's not how the world operates. It's messy, it's complex, it's uncertain. We need to educate more in the way that we experience life and prepare students to be confident in their values and skills, their ability to adapt, to create, and to learn, and to get up when knocked down, so they are strong enough to make their way not just through the thinkable, but through the unthinkable. This will help prepare students for a world in which they will follow their hearts and seek their ways of being forces for good, their ways of contributing to creating a world where the tragedy of Nice, of Misha, becomes unthinkable. If Nice taught me anything, it was this. When our young people were no longer there to take a course as students, but to take their own measures as people, what they knew and who they were each so important. And I had to ask myself if, as an educator, I was doing all I could do to help them along their way. So herein lies my challenge as an educator, and perhaps yours too. Whatever our area of expertise might be, we are all called to show our students not what to see, but how to look for a new mindset and a new worldview. One that integrates fully their knowledge and skills, their willingness to step up, to step out, their resilience in the face of adversity, and a well-forged sense of their own humanity. If I do not meet this challenge, I risk my students being too easily seduced by unthinking and inhumane ideology and doing what is easy, what is shiny, what increases the bottom line, by what gets them what they want with no regard for the broader consequences of their actions. Nice took me deeply into the dark. Now, in the light that has followed, I am inspired to do more, to do better, to lay new tracks. Thank you.